Royal Guard mocked at the shooting range, unaware he's a former SAS sniper. Show us what they teach you at the palace, old man. One shooter smirked. But what they didn't know was that the quiet Royal Guard they were mocking was a former SAS sniper. And when he finally took the shot, the entire range went dead silent. Before we reveal what happened next, hit that like button and drop a comment below telling us where you're watching from today. Now, let's get into it. The air at SIR's oldest private shooting range carried that distinct mix of gunpowder, sun-warmed grass, and testosterone. You know the smell if you've ever been to one of these places, like metal and ambition cooking in the afternoon heat. Rifle cracks echoed off the distant hills, sharp and rhythmic, almost like a heartbeat against the countryside quiet. Shooters clustered around folding tables, comparing gear with that special kind of pride only gun enthusiasts understand. Each trying not to be too obvious while checking out what everyone else brought. This wasn't any ordinary weekend. It was invitation only. That annual gathering where veterans, collectors, and civilian marksmen sized each other up through spotting scopes and carefully casual comments about wind drift. The kind of place where you could spot the real professionals by how little they talked about being professionals. Robert Hargrave stood alone near the far fence, just watching, not hovering, not awkward, just there, sipping lukewarm tea from a paper cup, wearing a dark field jacket with no patches, no tactical gear, nothing that screamed, "Look at me." Just a man in his late 40s with the kind of stillness that makes people look right past you. He'd been standing there for over an hour, saying nothing, shooting nothing, just watching each shooter with those quiet, measuring eyes. The way his gaze tracked barrel movement, the way his right thumb occasionally twitched against his cup when someone pulled a trigger, the way he could stand without shifting weight for 15 minutes straight. Little things, things most people would miss, things that would have told you everything if you'd bothered to notice. But no one was noticing Robert Hargrave today. They were too busy watching Tom Kersey make his entrance. Kersey arrived like a walking Instagram post. Everything about him curated for maximum effect. Tan boots laced to perfection. Shirt sleeves rolled just so. Mirrored aviators reflecting everyone but revealing nothing. That carefully maintained stubble that takes more work than a clean shave. The kind of guy who probably took selfies at the gym but captioned them with quotes about humility. "Gentlemen," he called out, moving through the crowd like he owned not just the range, but the air above it. "Time to show these weekend warriors how it's really done." Everyone knew Tom's story because Tom never shut up about it. Royal Navy, now running some tactical training company with a YouTube channel full of slow-motion recoil shots and merchandise with skull logos. He'd say things like, "In my line of work," at least 3 times in any conversation. Vague enough that you could think it meant anything from special forces to secret squirrel stuff. It probably meant selling $200 t-shirts to guys who wanted to look dangerous at the grocery store. Kersey set up in the center lane. Of course he did. Unzipping his rifle case with the dramatic flourish of a magician about to pull off his best trick. The rifle that emerged was a custom-built precision beast painted matte black with just enough red accents to scream, "I paid extra for this." The scope probably cost more than most people's monthly mortgage. "Zeroed this baby in at 600 last week," he announced to nobody and everybody. "If I miss today, blame the wind, not the rifle." That's when he spotted Hargrave. "You all right there, mate?" Kersey called out. "Need directions to the tea-tent?" A couple shooters chuckled. The easy, eager laughter of men hoping to be included in the cool kid circle. Hargrave didn't react, didn't even look over. He was still watching a younger shooter, struggling with his prone position, elbows spread too wide, grip too tight. This non-reaction seemed to annoy Kersey more than any comeback would have. "Tell you what," he pressed louder now. "You help clean up after we finish, and I'll let you hold the real rifle." More laughter, a bit forced, a bit louder. Someone's stage whispered to his buddy, "Isn't that guy just one of those ceremonial guards, or something?" "Looks like it," came the reply. "Probably here to watch and tell stories about standing still at Buckingham Palace." No one asked Hargrave directly. Why would they? The quiet ones never had anything worth hearing, right? But one man, sitting near the back of the bleachers, gray beard, rigid posture, eyes that had seen things most people only watched in movies, folded his arms and watched. Not Kirsty, Hargrave, because he recognized something in that stillness. The kind of stillness that costs something to learn. After nailing 3 consecutive hits on steel at 400 m, Kersey turned to his growing fan club, rifle balanced across his shoulders like a gym weight. Ladies and gentlemen, that's how it's done. Precision, pressure, and a bit of backbone. His gaze swept the crowd, collecting admiration like loose change. Then it snagged on Hargrave, still unmoving, still silent. "What about you, guard boy?" he called out. "Fancy a go? Or are you afraid the rifle might actually go off without the Queen's permission?" Laughter rippled through the crowd. Hargrave didn't respond. Didn't even blink. That only fueled Kirsty more. "Don't worry, I get it. Lot of pressure when you're not just standing still in a fancy red coat. No tourists to impress out here. You think he's one of those guys who march around with the fuzzy hats?" Someone asked, loud enough to be heard. "Bet he polished his boots for this," another added, probably waiting for royal permission to breathe. More chuckles, though not quite as enthusiastic now. Something was shifting in the air. Mockery has a half-life when the target doesn't react. The gray-bearded man on the bleachers leaned forward, elbows on knees. There was something about Hargrave's stillness that bothered him. Not because it seemed off, but because it seemed familiar. That posture, that patience, that silent assessment. It wasn't fear keeping Hargrave quiet. It was something else entirely. Back on the line, Kirsty prepared for another shot. "Think he's going to say something?" someone asked him. Kersey grinned, eyebrows lifting above his mirrored shades. "Doesn't have to. I'll say it all for him." The par veteran on the bench had seen enough. His eyes narrowed slightly as he watched the scene unfold. He'd seen this mistake before, and he knew exactly what it usually cost. It was after Kirsty hit another target at 500 m that he made his move. He stood tall, brushed his hands together with exaggerated satisfaction, and pointed toward Hargrave. "All right, Buckingham, let's settle this proper." The crowd shifted, sensing entertainment. A few phones appeared, ready to record whatever happened next. 1 shot each. Same target. Let's see what the Queen's finest can do when the rifle's not just for decoration. Hargrave finally looked over. His face gave away nothing. No anger, no fear, no eagerness to prove anything. Just calm assessment. "I'm not here to compete," he said simply. His voice was quiet but clear. The kind of voice that doesn't need volume because it's used to being heard the first time. Kersey smirked. "Didn't think so." He turned to his audience like a magician who just made something disappear. "See, no offense to the man, but that's the difference. Some of us trained to shoot, others trained to pose." More laughter, but thinner now. Even some of the earlier mockers glanced at Hargrave with more curiosity than contempt. Something wasn't quite adding up. The quiet guy should have been embarrassed or angry by now. He wasn't either. The range officer, a lean, no-nonsense man with a face that had weathered both sun and stupidity for decades, finally spoke up. "If it's a sanctioned challenge, we keep it clean. No side bets, no drama." "Clean as a parade boot," Kersey replied, already loading a fresh round. The officer looked to Hargrave. "Your call." Hargrave said nothing for a long moment. His eyes weren't on Kersey, but on the distant target, measuring, calculating. "If I take the shot," he finally said, "it won't be for the crowd." Kersey clapped his hands. "Brilliant. Then step up, Buckingham. Show us what parade ground training gets you." Hargrave didn't move immediately. "I said, I'm not here to compete," he repeated. But he walked toward the firing line anyway. The power on the bench leaned back slightly and muttered under his breath. "Here we go." The range went quiet, not with tension exactly, more like anticipation. The feeling right before you find out if you've badly misjudged something. Kersey adjusted his shooting gloves and whispered to a nearby admirer, "He won't hit center." Not with iron sights, no way. But a few others weren't so sure anymore because the guard had finally stepped forward, and something about the way he moved said this wasn't his first time being underestimated. Hargrave knelt by the equipment table with unhurried precision. No showmanship, no hesitation. He bypassed the modern customs with their glowing optics and carbon fiber stocks, reaching instead for an old bolt-action rifle with worn wooden furniture and simple iron sights buffed smooth by years of use. He picked it up, checked the chamber, cycled the bolt once, then nodded to the range officer. "This will do." Kirsty scoffed from nearby. "That thing's older than your ceremonial boots. Sure you don't want a real rifle?" Hargrave didn't acknowledge him. The para finally rose and approached, speaking quietly so only Hargrave could hear. "You don't have to prove anything to him, lad." Hargrave glanced up. "I'm not." He straightened, rifle in hand, and stepped toward the line. "I just won't let him walk away, thinking the regiment's soft." The para gave a slight nod. "Fair enough." By now, the entire range had gone still. Even the ones who'd been joking earlier were watching with new intensity. Kirsty leaned on his rifle, still confident, still smirking. But something had shifted. The mockery had dried up like morning dew. What replaced it wasn't quite respect, not yet, but something closer to caution. Hargrave moved into a prone position with the kind of fluid efficiency that comes from muscle memory carved by thousandfold repetition. No wasted motion, no adjustment, just one smooth transition from standing to ready. The range officer leaned toward the para and asked quietly, "You know him?" "Not by name," the para replied, "but I know the way he moves." "How's that?" The par's eyes didn't leave Hargrave. "He's done this for real." And for the first time that day, even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Hargrave lay prone on the gravel, his body melting into the ground like he belonged there. He didn't shuffle or fidget, just settled, elbows anchored, cheek welded to the stock, breathing visibly, slowing to a metronome's steady rhythm. The bolt-action rifle wasn't pretty. It was functional, worn, honest. But in Hargrave's hands, it looked less like a tool and more like an extension of his will. "No scope," someone whispered. "No need," the para replied softly. "He's shot at men, not paper." The steel target stood 600 meters out, half concealed behind a wind-cut barrier. It wasn't a clean silhouette. It required instinct and adjustment, especially without optics. The range flags fluttered to the right, not heavy wind, but inconsistent. Hargrave made no visible calculations, no notes, no checking data on a phone app, just eyes, memory, and muscle. Kirsty leaned in beside the range officer. "What's the spread?" "Single round, same as yours," the officer replied. "Nothing changes." Kirsty laughed softly. "Well, that's not fair. His rifle's from the last century." The officer didn't respond. A couple of shooters shifted their weight, suddenly unsure if they were still part of a joke or witnessing something they'd misunderstood entirely. Hargrave's finger found the trigger. He didn't squeeze it. He let it rest there, light as a thought. The world narrowed down. No cameras, no audience, just the target, the wind, and the memory in his hands. From the sidelines, the para folded his arms. "Watch this," he murmured. "Shooter ready?" the range officer asked. Hargrave didn't answer with words, but he exhaled. A long controlled breath that seemed to take something with it, and with it, the entire crowd leaned forward, not because they believed yet, but because they couldn't look away. The target track jerked once, then again, gliding left to right in irregular bursts across the far end of the range. Kersey had taken his shot against it earlier with a high-powered scope and still only clipped the edge. Hargrave's iron-sighted rifle had no such advantage. He didn't adjust, didn't blink, just inhaled slow, deep, then let it out in one final unhurried release. The shot cracked across the range like canvas tearing. Not dramatic, not flashy, just clean. The steel rang half a second later, a single pure tone that echoed down range like a bell being struck dead center. The target swung violently on its rig back and forth as if surprised by its own pain. For a heartbeat, The range was silent. Then someone whispered, "No way." Kersey straightened, squinting through his expensive sunglasses. Hit. The range officer stared at the monitor. Dead center. No scope. He leaned closer to the screen. 600 m. Wind drift. Iron sights. His voice trailed off. The Pirog nodded, eyes fixed on Hargrave like he'd known all along. Hargrave stood slowly, brushing gravel from one knee. He didn't look at the crowd, didn't raise the rifle triumphantly or crack a grin. He simply cleared the chamber, checked the safety, and handed the weapon back to the range officer. One by one, the whispers started. "Who is he? Did you see his form? That was textbook." Kirsty looked down at his own rifle, then back at the target, still swinging like a metronome, marking his miscalculation. Someone nearby murmured, "You just got outshot by a guy you called Buckingham." But Hargrave had already turned away, heading back toward his bench like nothing unusual had happened. The applause, when it finally came, wasn't loud or coordinated. It was awkward, scattered, then steady. Not for showmanship, but for something earned. And in the middle of it all, Kirsty remained silent. Because some shots don't need commentary. Hargrave sat back down at the bench, rolling his sleeves and wiping dust from his palms. No celebration, no victory lap, just silence. The kind that doesn't ask for respect, but commands it anyway. A few shooters approached cautiously, as if they were approaching someone they'd just realized was a different species than they'd thought. One of them, maybe mid-20s, finally asked, "Where'd you learn to shoot like that, sir?" Hargrave looked at him for a moment, not unkind, just measuring how much truth to give. "Here and there," he replied simply. The para stepped forward, hands in his pockets. "That wasn't infantry training," he said loud enough for others to hear. "That was something else." Kirsty stood a few yards away, arms crossed tight over his chest, jaw working. The Pero turned toward him. "He's SAS, isn't he?" Hargrave didn't confirm or deny. He didn't have to. He just reached for his thermos, unscrewed the cap, and took a quiet sip. And somehow that non-answer said more than any war story could have. A hush settled over the range. The same people who'd laughed an hour ago now watched with the kind of quiet respect usually reserved for funeral processions. One of the younger shooters turned to Kersey. "You said he was just ceremonial." Kersey didn't respond because right then the word felt too small, too ignorant, too far from the truth. Another man whispered, "I thought those redcoat guys just marched around for tourists." Hargrave finally looked up again. "We do," he said evenly. "But we don't forget who we were before the parade." Then he went back to his tea. Kersey eventually approached, walking slower than before. The swagger had drained from his steps, leaving behind something more genuine, like a man who'd just had his perspective forcibly adjusted. He stopped a few feet from Hargrave and cleared his throat. "That was a hell of a shot," he said quietly. Hargrave gave a single nod. "Thank you." Kirsty shifted his weight. "Look, I didn't mean to disrespect. I thought you saw the uniform." Hargrave finished for him, not unkindly. "Most do." The para chuckled softly. "Hell, even I thought he might be just another palace face until he dropped into that prone position." The younger shooters clustered nearby now, some still whispering, others just watching with new eyes. Hargrave stood, brushing off his jacket. People forget ceremonial duty is a rotation, not a career. You don't get posted to the guard without earning it first. One of the teens asked, "So, the Queen's guards are like actual soldiers?" Hargrave looked him dead in the eye. "Infantry first always." A few heads nodded as it sank in. Kersey exhaled and extended a hand. "Well, that's my lesson for the day." Hargrave shook it, firm but brief. "We all serve in different ways." Behind them, the range officer updated the logbook, quietly adding a note beside Hargrave's name. 600 pens, iron sights, center strike. Another man walked by, muttering to his friend, "Remind me never to judge a red coat again." The para leaned over to the officer. You going to list him on the range record? Already done, the officer replied. He earned it. Hargrave slung his duffel over his shoulder. Movement smooth and precise, not for show, but from years of having to get it right the first time. Someone called out, "You coming back next weekend?" Hargrave paused at the edge of the range, offering the faintest smile. "Depends if I'm on post." The crowd chuckled, this time not at him, but with him. And as he walked toward the gate, there was no more mockery, only quiet and respect. The gravel crunched beneath Hargrave's boots as he crossed the car park, each step measured and unhurried. He walked like a man who didn't need the last word, because actions had already said everything that mattered. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the lot, painting him in fading gold as he reached his vehicle. A nondescript gray estate car with no stickers, no badges, nothing that would tell you who owned it. He popped the boot, placed his duffel inside, and removed his jacket, folding it with the same care he'd once given to field gear in places most people couldn't find on a map. He stretched once, then leaned against the car door, sipping the last of his tea. Back at the range, the par lingered by the benches, arms crossed, watching Hargrave until the last moment. A younger shooter approached him. Who was he really? The Perro didn't turn. Someone who doesn't need to be recognized to matter. The boy frowned. But why didn't he just say something earlier? Why let them mock him? The Para finally looked at him. Because true silence isn't weakness, son. It's choice. Just then, someone called from the fence. "You're really not going to tell us where you served?" Hargrave turned slightly, a ghost of a smile touching his expression. "If you have to ask," he said, "you've already forgotten what matters." Then he got in his car and started the engine. No one clapped. No one filmed, but they watched because the loudest person on that range had been silenced by the quietest man there, and not through argument, through one clean shot. Have you ever judged someone by what they wore before knowing what they'd done? How many times have you mistaken silence for weakness? Tell us in the comments below. We read every single one. If this story changed how you see ceremonial soldiers, drop a like. It helps more than you know. Make sure to subscribe and hit that bell icon so you never miss our daily stories. And if you know someone who thinks redcoats are just for decoration, share this with them. Let them see what quiet discipline really looks like when the safety's off. You should see our other Royal Guard stories popping up on your screen right now. Check those out next. And we'll see you tomorrow, same time, with another story that proves tradition isn't weakness, it's legacy.